our mistakes and failures do not define what we become, or what we will be. The path ahead may lead to ruin, yet one must stay focused, and click this button prompt to continue. My name is Ice, and this is why you should play God of War. In this character-driven game, you take control of Kratos, the Spartan-born god of war who usurped Ares and laid waste against the Olympian pantheon whom wished to meddle in his affairs, and more importantly, his fate. It's a continuation of an epic story with a twist. Kratos is now a father. More on that later. First, the technicals. God of War is 64 gigabytes, walking the line of a higher medium and smaller large. Is it worth the space? Depends on your device and library, but hopefully this video will help define the answer along the way. The game performs great. I had a few frame drops here and there, but normally only when loading in a level, followed by a steady 60 FPS, and the kicker being the absolute slew of graphical settings this game has. I honestly don't think I've seen a game with this many options. It was almost overwhelming. It's also got a huge array of accessibility features, which I greatly appreciated, and I think you would too. I actually turned off the compass and enemy indicators for my playthrough because I didn't want that shit, and the HUD was present enough. So I'm extremely pleased and thankful the developer actually thought to include details like this. And in all, it aided a lot of the experience, of which I'll start with combat. It's not the most inspiring system to learn, but what it boasts is variety and above all, flair. So just a basic rundown. Kratos' tools are an axe, a shield, and his bare hands, as well as another option accessible later on. With each you have individual skill trees, though the shield and hands fall under the same category. These skill trees will supply combo extenders or brand new animations or abilities to your regular repertoire that aid in adding punchiness to the combat. This visceral charged heavy was probably my favorite of the pack, and also just punching enemies down to rip them in half was cool too, though a little repetitive. And it's this repetition where you either find fondness and ingenuity or find boredom and button mashing. The game has difficulty settings, but it's the monotonous kind where higher difficulty just means more enemy HP and higher damage. Thus learning the combos is where that actual game aspect comes into play. These combos are bolstered by runic abilities, which are pretty much mods that bind two special attacks to your weapon labeled light and heavy. For me, I found my niche rather quickly, using the shield bash and ice slam runic abilities the entire time, as I found stun to be the best way to utilize combos. In these runic abilities, you have a lot of variety, as the effects can range wildly from being a ranged assault or something up close and personal, something founded on sheer damage or on debilitating your opponent. Nothing will necessarily push you one way or another or request you use different abilities for different situations, but the pause menu lets you seamlessly swap everything on the go anyways, so experimentation is very open and allows for a lot of freedom in how you want to tackle situations, which is great because it helps flesh out what I think is the biggest selling point of this combat, the cool factor. The animations look great, they're responsive, they're colorful, and everything looks really good. Could the game use more enemy variety? Absolutely. But if you had to have my honest opinion on if doing a charged heavy into the shoulder of some dreggling mob ever gets old, no. It's pretty fucking sick, and I really appreciated how closely the game kept to its hack and slash roots in the art department. I've never played through the entirety of the OG games, but have consumed so much media of it that it damn near feels like I have. So as an outsider, I do think they stayed pretty true to that aspect, though even looking at the old games, some of the magic was lost and some of it was implanted elsewhere. Which feeds into my next topic, exploration and loot. The game's a semi-open world. Not quite the same structure as a Skyrim or Elden Ring, but it does have offshoot areas to complete other tasks. Picture it like this. You have a big circle, that's the Lake of Nine, and then you have a bunch of branches that are their own areas. They won't all look different, those will instead be the actual worlds you visit between Alfheim, Helheim, Muspelheim, Niflheim. I assume Heim means world in Norse, though I wish you spent more time in them, as more than 70% of your time will be spent in Midgard. But what you can expect is lots of nature, mountains, caves, forests, open fields, and what makes them more interesting is the puzzles. I actually quite enjoyed them, and barring how good you are with puzzles, you might as well. They aren't hard, they aren't big thinkers, but some of them will certainly give you an aha moment or two, especially when it comes to the ones where positioning is a factor. Aside from that, pretty much every room and hallway will spawn enemy encounters, and contrary to open world games where you can just run, this game expects you to fight, and will sometimes establish set pieces to make them more climactic. There'll be a lot of pauses and breaks that'll incorporate dialogue, camera movement, and introduce targets and foes, which can be good and bad, but I'll talk about presentation a little later. So let's focus on the loot and how the gear system works. You have 3 pieces of gear equipped at any one point: your chest piece, leggings, and gauntlets. Depending on rarity and the level of this equipment, these will have a number of enchantment slots. Enchantments are fully toggleable, like runic abilities, and offer specific buffs. These buffs can range from damage increases to certain moves, or even damage resistances to certain enemies and other things in between. This gear then plays into your actual character stats. There is no traditional level up in this game, instead locking combos, finishers, and the like behind that skill tree I mentioned earlier. The stats are explained in-game, so I'll spare you the details, but this essentially dictates your character's build is based on the equipment you're wearing, rather than decisions you'd make in the early game crescendoing in the late game. So no stress involved, nice and casual. And as for loot, this is where the puzzles factor in. Rewards. There'll be the occasional loose item, but most everything is found in chests, and the distinct variation of chests will hint towards what might be contained within. You'll find an assortment of equipment, key items, upgrade materials, and more often than not, hack silver, which is the common currency. It's pretty self-explanatory, but the game will hide very important buffs behind the more convoluted Where's Waldo chests, generally hiding an apple, which raises your max HP, and a horn, which raises your rage capacity, meaning the most time-consuming chests will have the most important rewards. These ones are definitely tedious at times, but also incorporate the world in the most creative way, hiding rocks in plain sight or behind moving contraptions, forcing you to play around with the interactable levers and switches you'll notice. It makes you key in on the environment quite a bit and experiment with the capabilities of player manipulation. I found it rather creative since it did make me think outside of the box a bit, and also surprised with what moving parts they'd actually designed to be looked at twice. But after a while you start to notice the same conventions used, and puzzle solving becomes a lot quicker and more intuitive, and at the same time a little mind-numbing. Which brings me to a broader topic. Presentation. This game, like the old ones, is highly founded in cinematography. The camera angles and direction make it almost feel like a movie. How they'd frame certain arenas and how this game specifically frames the heroic entrance or the quiet moments of contemplation and reprise. It's wonderful and feels very much like a movie. And this is a topic that's endemic with Sony games. Is that a good thing? We're two different people. As much as you'd hope I always agree with you, I'm in an awkward position of trying to look at this game as objectively as possible, and our definition of games can be vastly different. In about 75% of cases, the cinematography of this game was great. The other 25% I could have absolutely lived without. Unlike the older games where scale and scope were massive trademarks and used to build levels and tension, this game is far, far more grounded, which is fitting with the general theme of trying to better oneself and not repeat mistakes. Kratos in this game is on a stoic journey of self-discovery. Yes, the boy's present, but Kratos very clearly has no idea what he's doing, is listless and grieving. His wife died in the first 5 minutes of the game, which was highlighted by a very out-of-place soundtrack in my opinion. Then you'll have those amazing moments where the camera draws back and shows you the greater scene of what's happening, or heartwarming moments accomplished through slow-burn character relationships. The more elaborate backdrops even had some mobility to them, and man, what a great job the art designers did here. In terms of refinement and machination of these animations, they balled out. Though far too often, the game tried to have those seamless cutscene transitions where it'd go into an on-rails action shot where it looks like you should be playing, but you're not, and it really pissed me off. Am I too stupid to run in a straight line? Whatever, it was more of an issue when one of them took literally 4 minutes. 4 minutes of watching an action sequence? Yeah, regardless, I don't know much about Nordic culture or the pantheon of gods found amongst the Aesir, though the design choices they made, and especially the representation of the runic alphabet, were really great touches that speak truly to the game's setting. Now forget the art. The presentation there is great, but in my opinion can be sidelined under this one aspect, the sound design. Here in God of War, they had a solid game, and shaped it with the most intricate and layered sound design I've ever heard. Literally, everything about this game's sound is sonic bliss, and it is highly immersive and well done. Seamless shifts from the acoustics of a cave to open air, without that weird cut that often feels like someone toggled an effect.
There was a giant once, named Thamur. A very giant, who, despite his mountainous size, was without question the greatest stonemason this world.
The thwack of the Leviathan axe as it recalls to Kratos' hand.
All together.
The seamless shift of a fist sound effect to the clang of the shield slamming against your foe's temple. It is dynamic, incredibly recorded, and pitched perfectly. If you're an audiophile at all, or even discern these kinds of qualities, for all the games I've played, I can't think of one that does it better. It is a minor, more background element, but think about how much of the gaming experience is encompassed by sound. If a game has wacky sound effects, you immediately notice it. If a game has incredibly harrowing sound effects, you immediately try to avoid the trigger. But in God of War, the sound is pure satisfaction, and easily my favorite aspect. If it wasn't as good, I wouldn't have been half as eager to get back into combat. If it wasn't as good, I wouldn't have been enveloped by the litany of environments this game offers you. Ambient soundtracks, flawless transitions between stepping on wood and stepping on dirt, such a small thing that puts you in the scenery. There were no jarring moments where a shout or loud bang took me out of the game. Instead, I felt like everything was surrounding me. And I touched on it earlier, this game is grounded. I never felt as powerful as I'd hoped, being called the God of War and all. I'd relate the experience more to an IMAX movie. No matter where you looked, you were in the scene, in the moment, and it was the sound that hunkered me down the most. So I guess now's the time for my opinion. I enjoyed the game. I don't think it's great, or as great as most people have lauded, but it is certainly good, and on the higher end of good. As for me, I felt the game didn't deliver in some regards. I never felt challenged or pressed to learn the world I was walking. Instead, my experience was seated in familiarity that could honestly blend into a few other titles. I think the ending wasn't very satisfying. It was very, very egregious sequel bait, and was outwardly ruined by a certain final boss encounter. But the culminating moment following it left me wondering where the story would go, and in my mind, that's a good thing. So this is where the thumbnail comes into play. The game can very evenly be split between two halves. I think the first half is significantly more interesting and well written than the second. Atreus' character in the second half is over-dramatized to showcase an emotion that didn't feel all that natural, coming from a kid that's shown to feel dejected and wanting to form a relationship with his often absent father. And I even found myself rooting for Atreus because of that. Then circumstance happens and logic flies out of the window, and Atreus becomes ruthlessly annoying, and felt like the writers themselves were belittling the brat's emotions that seemed very visceral in the earlier interactions. It blew my mind they took this route, as the game fell more and more into action sequences instead of exploring the emotional depravity of a man who secluded himself to snowy mountaintops to hunt game and hide from his haunting, bloodstained past. They didn't even take 2 minutes to uncover the relationship that Kratos had with Faye, and expected the audience to care about her passing for whatever reason the moment the game started. There are short bits with Kratos speaking candidly about her, but fuck man, why is Mr. Feel-Nothing and Miss Forest Lady getting more time to discuss their personal relationship than the character the game is titled for? It annoyed me beyond belief, because the setup in the first half was so good. The dipshit brothers allowed Atreus and Kratos to explore their dynamic further, but I just never got that sense of payoff. And they shoved that emotional note in a different relationship that he didn't have any emotional investment in to begin with. They do end up having bonding moments, but the character shifts in Atreus were so monochromatic, it didn't feel like it naturally blended into the other. Instead, as if the director told the VA, hey, you're going to read this line normal, then you're going to read this line as if you're annoyed, then you're going to be happy all of a sudden, okay? Santa Monica was known for a time for punchy, vicious one-liners that were edgy, dramatic, and above all, epic.
Serve the Titans!
Do not deny me my revenge!
They took a sharp turn towards something more melodramatic, and I don't think they met the challenge all that well. I have no idea what the sequel did as for a continuation, and I don't know if I'll ever play it since I don't plan to own a PS5 at any point, so I'm not that attached. But geez, that was upsetting. Everything else regarding gameplay makes up for the falters I felt in the storytelling department, but again, I can't stress this enough. The cinematics pile on, and will drag on, and are also unskippable. I think a fair rating for this game is a 7.8 out of 10. It's good, not great, and worth playing at least once if you're into the genre, and if anything I describe sounds intriguing. You may question what it's worth, and well, the story takes about 15 hours. I played for 21, but if you find the subject matter and world particularly compelling, you might sit on it for 50 hours straight. The typical price tag is $49.99, and I don't think it's worth that. I'd maybe wait for a sale and try to grab it under 15 bucks. Anyways, that's all. Thank you for watching. I always appreciate it, and consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video or want to see more.
Whatever.
I'm still working on the how-to and art direction videos, at this point collecting as much reference material as I can to better construct arguments and scenes without having to skim YouTube for clips. It's taking a while, and I'm sorry for all the delay. I can't attribute it to anything other than having bouts of losing motivation, but I'm not trying to get therapeutic here. I think it's best to just let things flow when it comes to me, and God of War had been on my mind. Anyways, look forward to more stuff, of course. I'm in the midst of playing Hollow Knight, which has been pretty neat. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.